All right, folks, we're going to get started. I'm going to call this meeting to order. So I hear some feedback. I'm going to move my phone away. Maybe it's something else that's feedbacking. Maybe it's that mic. Okay, I want to welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming out. And in the words of our president, what a huge crowd we have here today. It's all about the crowd size, folks. That's what matters really here. So I want to thank everybody for coming out, and actually, if we could, on a more serious note, start with a moment of silence for those that have passed away or been injured or are still yet to be found in the massive deluge that's taking place in Texas. So please join me for a moment of silence. Thank you very much. So welcome to the 53rd District. It's great to have you here. We're also in Jason Morgan's County Commission District. I know I saw Jason earlier. There he is, right back there. And in Chuck Warpehoski and Chip Smith's City Council District. Chuck is here with us. Chip had another engagement last minute that he had to go to. Rebecca Warren's State Senate District, and of course, Debbie Dingell's Congressional District, who has joined us today, but who has opted to, for the purpose of moving the discussion along, not make a statement here at the beginning. But we might hear a little bit from her later, or maybe she'll let other folks speak. I just wanted to basically I didn't mean that in a bad way. But she told me right at the beginning, she said, I don't want to speak because I want to hear from everybody else. I want to hear from the citizens. I want to hear from the folks in the room. So that was her that told me to say that, and she's wonderful. Thank you, Debbie, for being awesome. Debbie's amazing. That's the bottom line. So just briefly, to bring everybody up to speed, so we're talking about a really important issue for our community, as we can tell by the turnout here. It started in the 1960s when the Gelman Life Sciences company dumped over the course of, and Roger Rail's probably going to correct me on all my information, so I expect that. Over the next 20 years, dumped over 800,000 pounds of solvent into our groundwater. In 1984, it really started surfacing as an issue of hot public debate. A lot of people in our community started talking about it. In the later 80s, some cleanup did start, and since then they've been able to pull out about 100,000 pounds of that solvent, so just a fraction of what is still in our groundwater. There was a lawsuit that started in 1988 that led to a consent judgment with the company, and now there is another legal battle that is being waged, which Adam is going to talk briefly about. In 2010, the EPA tightened its standard around dioxane to make it actually 3.5 parts per billion. The state is currently operating with 85 parts per billion as its standard. And in 2013, the state was supposed to update its standard. It did not do that. And in 2016, the state issued an emergency guideline which updated the standard in the state of Michigan to something a little bit more stringent. So that's just a brief timeline of how things happen. I do want to give a brief shout out. We have a lot of different people represented up here, but as a former county commissioner, I want to acknowledge the role that the county has played in helping to address this issue over the many, many years that it's been taking place. We have a number of county officials in the room that I wanted to give a shout out to because I know that when I was on the county board, that was a hot issue of conversation that the county really took a leadership role in. And we have a number of other elected officials in the room, which Adam Zemke is going to be recognizing in just a few moments here. But my role was really to welcome you, bring everybody up to speed on where we were, and then hand it off to my wonderful colleague, Adam Zemke. And Donna Lasinski is actually going to go first, I believe, because she has oh, okay.
So thank you.
Yep.
So hello, I'm Donna Lasinski, and I represent 14 of the 20 townships in Washtenaw County. So
This is Mike.
Oh, there we go. Hello. Better? Okay. I had to stand up so I can see you in back. It'd be nice if you could hear me in back. So I'm Donna Lasinski. I represent Western and Northern Washtenaw County. So I represent 14 of the 20 townships in Washtenaw County. So everything but the city limits of Ann Arbor and the city limits of Ypsilanti and what's south of that. So there's 6 township areas that I don't represent. One of the townships that I represent is Scioto Township. So Scioto Township, if this glorious map behind me is working appropriately, see those really, really high spikes? That's where I represent. This is the origin of the Paul Gelman Plume. I say I live within a stone's throw of it. It wouldn't be my arm, it would be one of my teenage son's arms. But I can throw a stone from the backyard of my house to one of these very, very deep plumes. So in Scioto Township, with the origin of the plume, as it moves north and east into Ann Arbor, we face a little bit of a unique issue, a little bit different than maybe some of you who are here today visiting from Ann Arbor city limits. And that's that we don't have city water in the majority of our township. So our township is we largely source our water from wells, individual wells. So when we think about the Paul Gelman Plume, when we think about it moving north and east, and it's now started to drift a little bit west. I don't know if any of you remember the story about a year ago about a family who was renting a home with their young children. And they hadn't been notified because they were renting a home that the dioxin level in their house for a few years was above what was the acceptable under the higher standard that we were operating under. That house was right along Jackson Road here. And so we are seeing the dioxin move. We're seeing it moving. Here's Dexter Ann Arbor Road. We've got Wagner Road. Into some of these areas, we're getting small detectable levels, and we're really worried about the well quality there of individual wells. So in Scioto Township, and in the area I represent, what we're thinking about is the immense cost that it would take to put in water infrastructure, to put in city water infrastructure, if our wells become unusable. And so that's a huge challenge, living that close to the highest particulate, and as well as how we source our water through individual wells.
Thank you very much, Donna. I think that part of this, and it's really important to hear that story again, is because this is a personal thing, right? When we talk a lot about dioxane, we talk a lot about the standard, and that's a number, but that means something to people's lives, to all of us, right? And I think hearing that story is really important. So I'm Adam Zemke. I have the pleasure, I'll use that word lightly. If you've ever been to political fundraiser interviews, seeing everyone is always a pleasure. But the reason that I do want to acknowledge that we have such a large array of local elected officials from the city, the townships, and the county in the room is because this is an issue that does not exist at one level of government, right? And we need to all work together to ensure that our drinking water is safe. And that's really important. So we have a lot of folks in the room tonight. Mayor Taylor from the city of Ann Arbor. We also have council members Jack Eaton, council members Jane Lum, Kirk Westfall, Julie Grand. We have a number of county commissioners, Michelle Dietrich, Jason Morgan, Conan Smith, who is representing Ronnie Peterson on the panel tonight. And we have Howard Lazarus from the city of Ann Arbor, Kathy Knoll from Scioto Township, and probably some additional Scioto Township trustees that I could not spot in the crowd. So if I'm missing you, I apologize. The Scioto Township Board has been instrumental in working on this issue. And I think, Ann Arbor Township Supervisor Mike Moran is here with us this evening. I think that's everybody. But if I missed you, I do apologize, and please feel free to raise your hand. I know also our Water Resources Commissioner, Evan Pratt. I talked with him today. He has to be at another engagement this evening as well that is statutorily required under his job, so he had to be there. But sends his regards, and obviously has been very instrumental. There are essentially three areas that you're going to hear about tonight. And I just want to briefly call each of them out. One is you're going to hear a good discussion around vapor intrusion. You're largely going to hear about this from the Department of Environmental Quality because they do have one piece of it. But the state has appropriated nearly $1.4 million in the current budget around vapor intrusion. And so vapor intrusion, just a very brief one-line summary, it's designed to mitigate people from breathing in toxic fumes. That's the easiest way to describe it. And there's a lot of things that are handled around that in the site selection area or the site involvement, but other areas as well. So that's one important thing that you're going to hear about tonight. Another thing you're going to hear a lot about is the standard update. As Yousef alluded to in the start of his discussion to kick us off here, the standard is something that has gone through a lot of time before we saw some traction on it. But we did see some traction on it about a year ago, and we're going to see some updated traction that I think DEQ is going to share with us tonight. And then the third thing is the legal side. The consent agreement that Yousef spoke about in the 90s, the first one that was initiated into, that's something that is ongoing, and there have been some progress on that. But it's also an area that, because it's a legal agreement, there is a guarantee that cannot be made with it yet. It's a negotiation. Right, and there are multiple parties that have been added, and this is an important thing Congresswoman Dingell was just pointing out here. Now, whereas the consent agreement didn't include all of these parties previously, now the consent agreement will include the City of Ann Arbor, Scioto Township, and Washtenaw County. And those are important things, right, because these are all of our entities, City of Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, and Ann Arbor Township, and Scioto Township. And these are important things that needed to be added because we need to ensure that cleanup can be done as best as we can, right? There's also another part to this legal strategy though as well, and that's litigation. There's a lawsuit between the Department of Environmental Quality and Paul Gelman. And so I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and we wanted this to be a very open discussion tonight. So you're going to have an opportunity to ask all of those questions, but there are also, just keep in mind that there is not a definite answer on some of these things yet because of this legal issue, right? But I think that what you see from the commitment in the room from your local elected officials and from all of us up here is a commitment to ensure that people are safe and that our drinking water remains safe. And so without further ado, I'm going to...
just to add in there, because I want to protect all the local officials, parties to the lawsuit, I'm looking at Mayor Taylor, but parties to the lawsuit cannot discuss the lawsuit. So if I want to make that really clear. It is not people evading your answer. I sort of did my meltdown months ago and got told very clearly by the lawyers that there are things that people cannot talk about because it is in. So I want to make that clear that people aren't avoiding, they're still here, but there are issues that can't be discussed. Did I say that right? Thanks. Okay. Thanks.
So I'll just jump in. Hi all, I'm Conan Smith. I'm here today on behalf of State Representative Ronnie Peterson. Ronnie represents the east side of the county, Ypsilanti Township. He apologized that he couldn't make it here tonight. He has 2 other commitments in his district. Because I work for him though, and he knew I would be here because I live on the edge of the plume. These guys from DEQ have been in my backyard fairly frequently over the last year. He asked me to stand up for him here. Ronnie was also a county commissioner, served with Yousef and myself on the board for a number of years, and has had a leadership role in this issue from the county's perspective that entire time. In fact, he was one of the key leaders in the creation of CARD, our citizen coalition that Roger and others are engaged in that provide our insight and leadership. What Ronnie has really put on the highlight of his agenda with regards to this Gelman issue in particular is how important it is for those of them working at the state level to focus on the responsible parties and make sure that polluters are ultimately paying for the damage that they're causing to our communities. That has got to become, again, the #1 mantra for the state government in protecting your and my public health. We had that, right? That was legislation that was introduced and advanced by State Senator Alana Pollock. It was in place, doing good work, especially when this issue first came to the forefront of legislative awareness, and then was yanked from us by the Engler administration and forced us down these pathways that are frankly insufficient for resolving this crisis that's facing Scioto Township, the City of Ann Arbor, and our neighboring communities. So we not only have a real challenge in figuring out how to resolve the pollution issue that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, we also have a systemic issue about how we handle sites like this that are polluted all across the state of Michigan. I'm looking forward to discussing more of this with you tonight. My favorite role tonight, however, is actually introducing the quote-unquote fiendishly handsome Chuck Warpehoski is the city council member, one of the 2 city council members for the 5th Ward in the city of Ann Arbor, the west side. I'm proud to call him my city council member. Chuck is going to be our moderator tonight. He's been himself very closely involved in this issue. He was one of the teammates on city council that engaged them in the legal actions. Helped us get the representation of the city professionals sitting at the table, making the arguments on behalf of the residents of the city of Ann Arbor who are being impacted. But he's also one of these really smart guys who takes the time to learn the issue and goes to these quarterly meetings with DEQ to know what's happening down to the nitty-gritty. Here's a guy who loves detail. He really understands the issue at its heart, and he speaks to it from his heart. Chuck's going to be a great moderator for us tonight. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you, Conan. Now I'm blushing. This is great. That's it. My role of moderator is not to speak much. As Representative Zemke said, the city is in litigation on this issue, so we've been pushing for improved cleanup standard. We've been pushing for better monitoring. We've been pushing, along with CARD and other citizen leaders, for that shallow groundwater monitoring. But when it comes to litigation, there's not a lot we are able to say. So my role is to introduce right now Mitch Edelman from the Department of Environmental Quality. He's going to give an update from the state on where some of these issues stand. We, as Congresswoman Dingell said, our goal tonight is to keep these remarks up front brief so that you'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Mitch has promised me he'll keep it to 10 minutes or less, and so we're going to hold him to that.
Okay, I'm going to start my timer, so I'm going to try and adhere to that. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Dingell. I'm not going to list all the state and local representatives by name because that'll eat into the time quite a bit, but we really appreciate everybody inviting us here and giving us an opportunity to share updates with the public on the current status of the Gelman site. So my objective here is really to talk about the status of the dioxane rules, status of the consent judgment modification, and highlight other DEQ activities since the last town hall meeting, which was October of 2016. With me tonight from the DEQ is Kevin Lund. He's our senior geologist and environmental engineer. Not with me tonight, but still very much involved in the project, and I'm sweating up here as hot, I'm sorry. Is Dan Hamill, our project manager, and the reason he's not in the room tonight, and with his permission, I'm able to tell you that he's recuperating and rehabbing well from hip replacement surgery, so he'll be back almost full-time. I got you, thanks. Dan will be back in the office after Labor Day. So, and just to reiterate, DEQ shares the goal that was outlined by many of the introductory speakers to assure that people have safe water to drink. We care very much about it. We've been working hard to make sure that that's the case. We work with our city and county and township partners to make sure that that happens, along with the working with a liable party. And so with that, let's get into a little bit more detail. Last October, as I think it was, some of the speakers talked about the fact that changing the cleanup criterion rule for 1,4-dioxane was a long time coming. We've heard concerns from citizens after the EPA revised their toxicology profile of 1,4-dioxane in 2010, and it took the state, I will admit, too long to get that changed. But in response to public input and requests, we were able to issue last October 27th, the same day as the town hall meeting, an emergency rule for 1,4-dioxane for 2 pathways. One is the drinking water pathway. So that emergency rule that the DEQ issued in conjunction with the governor changed the number from 85 to 7.2 parts per billion. So since October of 2016, that's been the enforceable standard or criterion for 1,4-dioxane throughout Michigan, not just in Ann Arbor. That emergency rule provision only lasted 6 months, and there was one opportunity under the administrative procedures to extend that for up to 6 months if necessary. The initial thought by the department was that we were going to be able to have a comprehensive rule package for all 300 plus hazardous substances in our generic cleanup criteria rules by April, when the emergency rule was set to expire For numerous reasons beyond DEQ's control, we weren't able to make that happen, so a decision was made again by the department and the governor to extend the emergency rule for the drinking water criterion in April of this year. So we've still got the 7.2 part per billion enforceable criterion, and Gelman's been voluntarily working with us to assure that nobody's drinking contaminated water above that enforceable number. When we extended the emergency rule in April, we did not include the 29 part per billion screening level that was originally in the October 2016 rule for the vapor intrusion pathway that was mentioned earlier. And here's why. When we developed the 29 parts per billion based on what we thought was current toxicological information and chemical physical properties of the chemical 1,4-dioxane. During public comment process on rules in the fall of 2016, a consultant working for somebody other than Gelman submitted a comment that got our attention, and we went back to the drawing board because their comment was that DEQ's number for screening for vapor intrusion for dioxane, which shows up listed as a volatile chemical on EPA's chemical profile, EPA's number was much higher than DEQ's in our emergency rule. So it turns out we did conclude that there was sufficient toxicological and chemical information available to plug all that information into our equations. We ended up, when we recalculated with our screening number for shallow groundwater for the volatilization to indoor air pathway, which for purposes of tonight I'll call vapor intrusion for shorthand, 1,900 parts per billion, and based on what we know, based on what we know about shallow groundwater in relation to deep groundwater, in part with information gained from an investigation that Gelman conducted in the late summer, early fall of 2016, supplemented by additional sampling that DEQ has done of shallow groundwater in the form of the surface expressions of groundwater, i.e. seeps and springs and ponds, that the highest number Gelman detected in their investigation last fall was about 3.3 parts per billion, contrasted with 1,900 parts per billion. That was in shallow groundwater. Deeper groundwater concentrations nearer the source come closer to that 1,900 parts per billion number, but we didn't think that we needed to include the 1,900 in an emergency rule, so that's why it wasn't included. And, oh my gosh, time is flying. So, we had then hoped to have the comprehensive rule package done by October this year, and I don't think that's going to happen. So our reaction to that, Director Grether of the DEQ decided to promulgate a rule package amending only the drinking water number in a more formal non-emergency rule format, and that process is underway. This green arrow here shows there's multiple steps in the rule promulgation process. So we published on our website a proposed rule on July 20th and then sent it to the Office of Regulatory Reinvention on August 1st. That commenced the beginning of a public comment period that culminated on August 22nd with a public hearing. That public comment period is now closed. We received 4 comments, all in favor, so our job now is to compile that information, send that off to the Office of Regulatory Reinvention and the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules so that they can forward it in the rulemaking process. Our goal, and we're on target to get this, we need to get it out of our shop by Friday, and we think the short story is we can end up at rule promulgation, the last step for the 1,4-dioxane drinking water only rule, by about October 17th, which is 10 days before the emergency rule expires. Immediately thereafter, recall I talked about a comprehensive rule package, and we want to get that moving. That's got numbers for other pathways associated with 1,4-dioxane, along with a number of 300 plus other hazardous substances. So our goal is to have that package. Actually, we're on track to get that out on Office of Regulatory Reinvention's website for an informal review prior to the formal public comment period.
Is this rule going to be at 7.5, the one you're pushing through now?
the one that we're formally promulgating is going to be 7.2 as well. And I think we're gonna hold off on questions till the end, right? So, but thanks for asking for that clarification. So, status of the consent judgment modification. Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell, for reinforcing one of the points I was going to make, and that's the last bullet on the slide about confidential discussions are underway. In response to the change in criteria, we've been saying in public for years that when and if the criterion changes from 85 to a lower number, we thought the first logical step was to have Gelman redefine the extent of contamination based on the new lower number. So we embarked in discussions with them and some negotiations for modification of consent judgment based on that lower number, and we're close to having an agreement that we thought we could take to the court about the time that Washtenaw County, and there was some somebody misspoke earlier about the intervening parties. I'm pretty sure this is right here, that we've got the county, city of Ann Arbor, Scioto Township, and Huron River Watershed Council are intervening parties, so they're now at the table with Gelman and the state of Michigan in our discussions using this draft consent judgment modification that we started. We thought we were ready to get to the court. So that's an ongoing process. We can't talk about it because we're under strict confidentiality.
So why don't you, but Scioto Township and Ann Arbor Township are part of the Superfund, which nobody's mentioned either.
Right. So
I throw that out.
So there was a petition by Ann Arbor Township and Scioto Township to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to do what's called a preliminary assessment, which is an early step in the process to list the site in the Superfund, on the Superfund list, which is shorthand for the formal name of the National Priorities List, or NPL. And my time is up. Can I have one or two?
Keep going.
Okay, thanks. Did I cover everything here? So we're in ongoing discussions. We hope to come up with a mutually agreeable consent judgment modification so that we can then share that with the public and get it blessed by the court. And we can talk more and move on to next steps. So I wanted to talk about things we've done since the last town hall meeting. We've sampled 54 residential wells, most of which are in Scioto Township. We're sensitive to Representative Lasinski's concerns too, making sure that people have safe water. And in areas of the township that are not provided by municipal water, the importance of an early detection to allow for adequate time to be able to provide wells that may be at risk with alternative water is really important to us as well. So, and when I say we've sampled, we actually have a cooperative agreement with Washtenaw County Public Health. We give them money, they go out and collect samples, send them to the DEQ lab. So, and it's important to note that all 54 of those wells have concentrations below the criterion of 7.2. We've split sampled 19 samples in calendar 2017, and by that, when Gelman goes out and collects samples from their 200 plus monitor wells, we occasionally go out and alongside of them fill up our water bottles, take them to our lab and compare our results to theirs, and they are matching up pretty well. And we figure that's another check and balance on the system. We've sampled multiple surface waters. I got a couple slides on that, and I mentioned earlier that those surface waters, in many cases, we believe to be what I would call surface expression of shallow groundwater, because as we all know, there's wet parts of the city. Why is that? Well, in some cases, because we've got shallow groundwater and there's low-lying areas of the city, and springs and seeps come out of the ground, and that's a surface expression of groundwater. And I'll say it now, and I'll say it again when I show the slides, all the surface waters that we've sampled have had non-detectable concentrations of 1,4-dioxane using a detection limit of 1 part per billion. We continue to participate in meetings with the CARD and municipalities. We did start and then later paused a community engagement effort that was at the request, both the start and the pause was at the request of local units of government, local governmental authorities asking us for more engagement with the community. So we took some bids, hired a facilitator, started a planning process with some representatives of local governmental authorities. And then after the intervention happened, we were requested to put a pause on that process to see if we can get any a consensus through the confidential negotiations about a consensus community engagement strategy. So we'll see where that ends up. So this is just a quick map to highlight where areas where we've done residential well sampling. So to give you some sense of where we are, the cursor here, that's Wagner Road. Here's Maple Road, so like I said, mainly Scioto Township areas, and again, those wells all below our enforceable criteria. Surface water sampling locations, this is divided them up into 2016, calendar 2016, and 2017. So the 16 stuff, we did, I think it was 7 locations. Only 6 are depicted on this map because the 7th one was Second Sister Lake, which is not on scale this map. So again, we sampled 7 locations in 2016, Second Sister Lake, West Park Pond, excuse me, Hannah Nature Area, had a creek that we sampled that we believe was a surface expression of groundwater, a seep at West Park, and seeps at 3 other locations, 401 7th, 719 Washington, 234 8th Street.
Which is Conan's house.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that. And then in 2017, we've already gone out and sampled a number of locations that include Allen Creek near Glendale Circle. We've done, and each of the next 3, the Allen Creek at Glendale Circle, we sampled in April and July of this year. Same with First Sister Lake, April and July, Second Sister Lake, April and July. We sampled up here the confluence of Honey Creek and the Huron River, and sampled, I think that's about it. And again, all those results were below the 1 part per billion detection limit. We've still got planned for the remainder of this calendar year sampling Third Sister Lake, ponds on the Smith property just immediately west of the source over in this area, and then Honey Creek and the unnamed tributary to Honey Creek. So anticipated for the remainder of 2017, we anticipate continuing our participation in discussions with the interveners and the liable party, with continued participation in meetings with municipalities and agencies, continued attendance at CARD meetings and wherever else we get invited, such as venues like this, and the additional sampling that I mentioned, along with some split sampling. And with that, sorry I went over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. And thank you. I do appreciate the technical information and the updates on the specific things that are ongoing from the DEQ level. Our last speaker on the panel is, so you've heard the elected officials and the state officials sort of do what we do as elected officials, pat ourselves on the back and say we're doing a great job. If there's anybody who deserves that pat on the back and has been really doing a great job, it's been Roger Rail and the people at CARD who've been keeping the ongoing. But it will count into our time at the end of the evening because the library will push us out the door. They're nice librarians, but they will make sure we get out of here. So Roger Rail is with CARD, the Coalition for Action Remediation of Dioxane. He's been a real leader in keeping this issue in front of us and tracking the data and making sure it's clear and transparent. So,
all right.
Roger.
Hello, everybody. Before I start, raise your hand if you're a member of local government or state government, or raise your hands. Keep them up.
I'm federal.
Federal's good too. All right, so we've got a lot of government people here. Bryce, I didn't see your hand up.
Who's up, Brian?
All right. So that's good that we have everybody kind of on the same page. I know I can't go over 5 minutes because I have some sciatica going on. And it reminds me of like 15 or 20 years ago when I was at a meeting like this and I was passing a kidney stone. So anyway, the Gelman site is the world's largest ongoing dioxane cleanup, and it should be managed accordingly with excellence to match the scale of the problem. What you see here is a time series of where the dioxane really is over time. You can see the years change up in the upper right. We want an effective, protective, community acceptable cleanup that doesn't transfer costs and risk to the public and doesn't allow dioxane to spread to any more water supplies at detectable levels or to basements where vapors can harm occupants. We need regulatory agencies and local community support framework that works effectively for the duration of the cleanup which is a very long time. So here we have some shots of the plume. Here are the township wells that might be impacted if it spreads. That's Scioto Township, Ann Arbor Township. When we pan back, here's the city of Ann Arbor. So this is a huge contamination problem that affects all three of these jurisdictions. So I said very long time. This is a time, a couple of stochastic models that Larry Lemke and his graduate students put together. So the average time for dioxane travel east from Wagner Road to the river, 74 years to 351 years. So I'm not going to be around 74 years, let alone 351 years. So we have to set up the regulatory agencies to be ready for this, for the life of the cleanup. This will require locating, organizing, and linking all available institutional, stakeholder, and community information about the site. Now, there's been some uncertainties introduced by omissions in data management and mistakes in reporting and analysis, which increase the probabilities of plume expansion that could affect more drinking water sources and human exposures sometime in the life of the cleanup. Uncertainties should be minimized. Dioxane might not vaporize into people's homes at dangerous levels, but to know that, we need proactive, ongoing sampling to assure this, not just whenever they feel like it. Dioxane may not spread to township wells north of, as it goes to Barton Pond, but to know that, we need to fill in the monitoring gaps. There's several monitoring gaps we pointed out in recent meetings. I tell people that Paul Gelman must be doing a great job because they've removed more dioxane than they said was down there. But of course, they refuse to calculate how much is left, and the DEQ is not required to do that. We want annual mass calculations to help determine where the purging is working well and where it is not. Currently, Paul shows data on their maps and diagrams that is not in their database, nor in the supposedly complete DEQ reconstituted database. The state also has sampling data that is not in the official database. There should be a complete, central, up-to-date, reliable, official database that all stakeholders can access. We should have full access to all the data about Paul Gelman's dioxane in our waters of the state. You know, I'm worried about decisions that are made behind closed doors. Too many decisions have been made with incomplete understanding and without benefit of local communities' support. Legal maneuvering has benefited the company and added cost and risk to the public. Now, I can say here that I'm not a party to any case, so I can talk to you about facts, where most of the people up here can't.
We're not party.
And you're not a party, right? I said most.
Debbie's on.
Right.
I'm always
So,
a party.
it's important that the legal process move forward, but it's also important that the public stay informed. The timescale. Keeping everybody informed and up to date about the site is a challenge, even for the limited 24 years that I've been involved. During that time, we've had Gelman Sciences turn into Paul, turn into Danaher, turn back into Paul Life Sciences and Gelman being given some money for 30 years to take care of the cleanup. The state regulatory agency has gone from the DNR to the DEQ to the DNR and back to the DEQ. The dioxane cleanup standard has gone from 3 parts per billion to 77 parts per billion to 85 parts per billion, and now back down to 7.2 parts per billion. We've had a whole raft of citizen groups working on this for years, culminating with the IPC and now CARD, Coalition for Action on the Remediation of Dioxane. And we'd like CARD to go forward and be the central agency to take care of this for as long as it needs to be. So CARD welcomes any of you who feel that you have skills that could help the effort. Because right now, there's a limited number of resources. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger, and I absolutely agree with the importance of getting facts out there. That's why the panel is so heavy on state, the elected officials, Congresswoman Dingell, so that people who aren't party to the litigation and have more ability to speak on some of these issues are here to answer the questions available. We do have a mic, so if people want to queue up at the mic with your questions, as people queue up, I want to thank the Ann Arbor District Library for hosting it tonight. Can we get a round of applause for the library? This library. They are a fantastic community resource. Being here though also means that we have a hard stop at 9 o'clock. We all have to be out the doors by 9. That means we need to wrap up tonight's event by 8:30 so we can clear the room and get everybody out. So as you are asking your questions, I'm going to ask that you remember what a question is. That is a question mark. I know that there's going to be some things you need to get out of the way before that. That's how this goes. But if we only gave Roger 5 minutes, keep that in mind as you're trying to make your questions brief, and if you can direct them to a specific member of the panel, that would appreciate it. First up, please.
My name is Rick Taylor. I'm a local real estate agent here in Ann Arbor. I want to thank... Can you hear me now?
Yes.
My name is Rick Taylor. I am a local real estate agent here in Ann Arbor. And I want to thank Representative Lasinski and Representative Dingell. One of the concerns that I have as a realtor is that we have to disclose to potential buyers about the plume and the negative impacts that have on the sellers. And it's something that we as realtors know, I'm sure citizens know, that the property values have declined greatly in Scioto Township. When some people may look at that as not a big deal or a big deal, but it affects your budget, it affects homeowner values. And as a realtor, we're kind of caught in this bitter pill that we have to swallow. We're trying everything we can to sell the property for as much money as we can, yet we have to disclose that dioxin is in the area. You might as well tell someone, a buyer, that somebody killed themselves in the house. It has that kind of effect. And so my question to you is this. If you have a well and there's no, plans for city water, so to speak, or a municipal water system to come in, is there any way to get Gelman to pay for that? Because it's unfair to ask Scioto Township to pay for something that they don't deserve, and you do not deserve what you've got. And I want to say thank you, and I mean that sincerely. Everybody here is thanking you for you just put in an impossible position. But I'm hoping for the sellers that are out there that are trying to sell, what options do they have? I've been told about the water, that you get water, and that they're willing to pay to have the water transferred from well to city water, but if there's not a municipal water system to begin with, too bad, so sad for you. Do you have any input on that?
So thank you very much for the question. That didn't sound like it reached the back of the room. Can you hear me back there? Okay. All right. So it is a very real issue. My business partner's brother lives at Wagner and Pratt, and he had an offer on his house within 5 days of putting it up for sale, and he was so excited. It was a couple from California, a family from California. And so when it was disclosed to them about the dioxin, it kind of went over their head until the wife Googled it, right? They withdrew the offer. They let the escrow dollars go. They said, we're not even going to fight about this. We don't want that house. Take our $10,000 that we put into escrow with the offer. We're not going to fight about it. We don't want to argue about it. We just don't want the house. So it is a very real issue that's impacting our homeowners and is impacting the property values. Realistically, for those of us who are not personally party to the lawsuit, I think you have raised an excellent, and that's why we do these things, Representative Dingell and all of us, is to hear these great citizens' ideas. That idea about Paul Gelman bearing some responsibility, either for ongoing well testing at the point of sale, for how we're going to look at investing in the municipal water supply that we know is going to be needed at some point, As Roger explained to us, there are some vagaries and mysteries about how this moves and how quickly it moves in certain directions. I think some of the northwesterly movement was not predicted 10 years ago that we're seeing now. That said, I don't want to build fright and fear. There is ongoing monitoring. It is a slow-moving disaster. We do have ideas about where it's going, but I think you've just given some of the negotiators in this room, particularly from Scioto Township, perhaps some fresh ideas that can be brought on the table to help protect our property owners, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Do you have anything to add about MDEQ's involvement with the monitoring and what happens when there's a detect on wells?
So, as I said earlier, DEQ does give money to the county to sample residential wells, and we put our heads together to figure out which ones need to be monitored. We use our knowledge about where the contamination is and where we think it is relative to where wells are located, thinking in 3 dimensions because you've got various depths of residential wells and depths of contamination. Gelman has stepped up and replaced the wells that need to be replaced, and we'll continue to advocate for that moving forward. And again, it's imperative, we've been saying in public for years now, that when the standard goes down, which it has, that the company be responsible to identify the extent of contamination based on the new lower number, so that we can all have more certainty about where the plume is, whether it poses an unacceptable risk, and if it does, how do we address those unacceptable risks in a mutually agreeable manner.
I just want to make a point real quick on that last question. A lot of homeowners, or all the homeowners who have their wells contaminated and have to switch to city water, they don't get paid to replace their sanitary system. They have to pay for that themselves. There's a lot of retirees in Scioto Township who have moved out of their houses because they couldn't afford the sewer hookup that's required. And then there's the issue of Ann Arbor Township or Ann Arbor City annexing homes that have city water, and that's a very controversial issue right now because Scioto Township doesn't want more annexation. So that's something that has not really been discussed. I'm a board member of the CARD group, and that's something that's come up many times. It's not clear where we're going in that regard. So I just want to make some points about the near surface water exposures. They found 2 part per billion, 3 part per billion near Slauson Middle School. And with that, they decided we're not going to do any more testing. So I'm very concerned about this compound getting into people's homes. We have a lot of wet basements on the west side of town. They're finding this on the west side of town. I just found out recently that Merrifield Park, which is upstream, very close to Vets Park, which is at 1,000 part per billion, or more than that, has seeps coming out of the hillside. A lot of wet basements in that area as well, and the groundwater can migrate up. I think we're seeing that in the West Park area where I and my wife, a toxicologist at the university, pressured the CARD group to get along and push the DEQ to actually do surface water testing. That wasn't in the plan. I'm glad they did it. I'm glad we moved along on that, but I think we need to continue. This compound seeping in the basements in the west side could be very detrimental. I don't want to take anything away from Scioto Township and their well waters. That's tremendously important to me and to them and to the CARD group. I think we need to keep on top of this, and we need the citizens to pressure our elected officials who can pressure our government officials, like the DEQ, to do more. It's hard to be a cool city when you have no drinking water, because we're going to have an issue with this moving towards Barton. There is some movement in that direction. The Plume, the prohibition zone was actually moved north a year and a half after it was set, north towards Barton Pond, which is an indication that there's a movement to the north towards Barton. And I think we need to make sure that Barton is not contaminated, because it'd be very, very expensive to fix that, if not impossible. We may have to do something dramatically different to get drinking water in Ann Arbor. So, and we don't have many other options in Ann Arbor. I've been to some meetings, and we got a lot of water, but it's not easy to get to, and it's not close to the city.
Do you have a question for the panel?
I would like to know why we cannot, as a community, know the danger we're facing, and why we're having these near-surface water seeps, stop tests on those. We should know what our dangers are, what exposures we're going to be dealing with. This will seep into people's basements and then evaporate. So it's a little bit different than vapor intrusion in the classical sense. But I think we're, a lot of wet basements, a lot of groundwater issues, all the way up to Merrifield. I think we need to stay on top of this. I think the Flint effect made a big difference.
So we had a question about what the status, I agree with you that keeping on top of shallow groundwater measurement, not just at the surface, but with some of the wells is important. Let's hear from Mr. Edelman where the status of those are, but I think I think all of us on the panel would agree that keeping an eye on that issue is important. Mr. Edelman?
Yeah, including DEQ, and as I mentioned, we've sampled in 2016 and 17 a number of surface water bodies, some of which are obviously seeps, some of which are ponds, probably connected to shallow groundwater. We've been out twice this year, sampling Allen Creek, First Sister Lake, Second Sister Lake. We've got planned yet this year to go out and sample Third Sister Lake. This pond's over on the Smith property, and Honey Creek, all of which are in Honey Creek, where we're sampling is in Scioto Township as well, right? Correct. So we agree. I think it's not entirely accurate to say that we've given up on shallow groundwater. When the concern when we've got a criterion of 29 parts per billion versus 1900 parts per billion drives the timeline associated with that, in our opinion. And we think that sampling these surface expressions of groundwater in areas down gradient from where we know the deep plume is a good strategy to get an assessment of whether there may be high enough concentrations in the shallow groundwater that may pose an unacceptable risk in these wet basement scenarios. So we're going to continue to work on that.
Well, the CART meeting, I was told that there were no more additional seep testings planned.
Well,
so that's my understanding.
Yeah, I'm just
I told you we weren't going to sample in the, I told you we weren't going to put in monitoring wells at this time. We had no plans to put in monitoring wells. We are continuing the seep sampling. We've been doing that. And I've been to your house, and we talked about this. And we sampled it right in your backyard, or darn near it, as well as another backyard.
But at the CART meeting, it was made clear to me, I thought, that there would be no more seep tests because of...
Well,
All right.
I'm telling you, we're sampling Third Sister Lake,
And we
Smith
have your
Ponds. I'm curious, and please get with Dan, Vince, or Kevin on this Merrifield Park. We're happy to add that to our list too.
I mean, we all think it's really important. We're all committed to making sure that you do that. So thank you for raising it. Thank you for committing to continue to do it.
So we have 6 speakers in the queue, 6 questions in the queue. We've got half an hour left. I've also noticed that the first 6 people in the queue are all male, so we can have, if we can consider diversity and inclusion in our queue, I'd appreciate that. But let's keep the questions moving.
My name is Quentin McMullen. I'm a local physician, and part of my job is to make a differential diagnosis when there's a problem. I think that most people's first reaction to hearing 85 is the marker for the state of Michigan, or has been, and it's 7 point something elsewhere, is one of shock. How can this be? So my differential diagnosis is it's either ineptitude at the state level, or it's a revolving door problem with Gelman, and I would like to know if there are officials that work for the state of Michigan or contribute to political campaigns that may have had an effect on the long delay in changing the standards, because I think it has a major effect on the whole process. And that's anybody that knows anything about this.
Question,
I would like the answer from them. That's the question.
So I'm going to ask it and feel free, Roger.
I have a quick response to that.
Okay.
Because I was involved when they gutted the pollutant pay law and they changed the standard from 1 in a million cancer risk over a 70-year lifetime to 1 in 100,000 over a 30-year lifetime. And they did that overnight, basically. I took time off work, I went up to the legislature, I was gonna give my testimony, they said, don't bother, we've already made up our mind. So I handed in my written testimony, but they went ahead and did it. And what they were doing was rewarding the slackers, the foot draggers, the companies that don't want to do cleanup. The ones that have already done their pollution control equipment were at a competitive disadvantage. They've already spent that money. And yet the slackers won. So that happened overnight. In 2010, the EPA issued these guidelines for stricter guidelines for dioxane, which should have brought the 1 in 100,000 70-year lifetime down to 3.5. Well, the state doesn't use 70-year lifetime. They use 32-year lifetime. Because who would stay in any one place more than 32 years? Well, I did, yeah. Anyway, so it's taken them more than 7 years to implement the stricter 7.2 standard. So yes, there's something going on behind the scenes. We will never know what that is in the future.
I'll address the legislative question directly. So a lot of the delay that we're seeing around this is because it's around a bundle of 300 chemicals that have been that are being reviewed for stricter standards. What you're seeing now with the emergency rule that was in place for 6 months, the emergency rule, and now hopefully this final promulgation in the next 14 weeks, is there's only one of those 300 chemicals that's happening with, and that's because of the work of your legislators right here. It's the only one of those 300 chemicals that's been pulled out as a priority. We know those other 299 are just as important to somebody to be pulled out and held to a stricter standard, but we have been able to at least get dioxin pulled out of that promulgation process for 300 chemicals. The reason we were undergoing that process for 300 chemicals is because our previous standards on those were based on US averages, and Michigan is different. In some good ways and in some ways that aren't so good. One, we tend to weigh a little bit more. So we carry around a little bit more chemicals with us every day. We tend to live in our houses and our homes longer on average than folks in the rest of the United States do. So looking at those timelines. And so there's a lot of unique Michigan factors that are going into reclassifying these 300 chemicals. But we've worked very hard to get dioxane pulled out of that process into the emergency rule promulgation and now to its own unique rule promulgation process because it is so important to us here, and we're the only legislators that have been successful in that. So yes, it's a long process, it's a tedious, terrible process that makes you want to pull your hair out, absolutely. But we are committed to making sure that we use every resource at our disposal and to our advantage at every level of government to try and make sure that this is a priority.
Except for political contributions from former Gelman executives.
I couldn't speak to that. I have no knowledge.
Thank you.
So just to answer that directly real quick, I don't believe anybody sitting on this panel has received that's very possible. Since we're speaking, I don't think that there's any political nefarious behavior going on with anyone sitting up here or other local elected officials sitting here. So I just want to.
So
All right, so I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, and that's fine. I know the news is here and everything, but just something in terms of the reality of how some of this stuff goes down. And I'm not speaking for anybody that's up here. I think Adam's right. I think a lot of us look at, these political donations and we, are understanding what the consequences are. But the reality is that the process in Lansing is pretty messed up. And again, I'm just being honest with you guys. I'm not sugarcoating it. The DEQ folks, they can't say this. But the reality is that the manufacturing community in Michigan has an immense role in that rule-setting process, and that has to do with their political contributions to other elected officials in our state, whether it's at the executive level or whether it's other state legislators. And so when the DEQ is trying to fight for doing the right thing, often what they're running up against is massive political contributions from the manufacturers who have a vested interest in making sure that those 300 items don't change their standard, because it will impact their operations. It'll force them to invest millions of dollars in cleaning up their operations, and they don't want that. And so they block these things. This is part of the reason why we've been dragging this process has been dragged out. We haven't been dragging it out. We've been trying to push the process along, but part of the reason that it's being dragged out is because of those political contributions. It's because of those people that are getting involved in the process at these early stages, because they're being included in these different boards and committees that are making these decisions. And so they're at the table making these decisions. The people who have a vested interest in not having any changes are at the table making these decisions. That needs to change, and that's something that we're all very cognizant of and really looking into. So I appreciate the question. I actually didn't hear the question because I was out getting water, but I think it was a good question because I know you and you're a good person. You tend to ask good questions. So, but I think hopefully that helps to answer the latter part of your question there, that money does play a role in this. I don't think it plays a role here, but I think it plays a role in Lansing, especially with the majority party that's in control of Lansing and has been in control of Lansing for the last 8 years. I don't think it's a coincidence that 2013 was supposed to be the year that something happened and nothing happened. And so there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and we need to bring to light the messed upness of this process, because it is pretty messed up.
Thank you. I will just add in that in addition to a system in which the political contributions and those vested interests have an outsized role, and the people who are at threat of drinking tainted water, whether here or in the Gaylord Grayling area or wherever, aren't getting the representation they need, a political districting system that is broken is also part of that. There were people with the petitions for to have a nonpartisan redistricting. That's going to be an important part of fixing the system so it's more responsive. Next question, please.
Hello, my name is Diana Wright, and is this better? My name is Diana Wright. I'm a lifetime resident of Ann Arbor.
Use the mic.
Keep close.
The panelists will report the question if it's not audible.
Is that better?
Yeah, stay there, real close.
My name is Diana Wright. I'm a lifetime resident of Ann Arbor. I wanted to first, I guess my question is, I feel for the folks in Sire Township. I mean, they're at ground zero. However, from what I've heard tonight, there's a lot of confidence placed on the fallback possibility that municipal water is going to solve the well problem. However, I believe the city of Ann Arbor, which is not on the panel tonight in any way, is whistling past the graveyard. The point is, the dioxane is in Ann Arbor. There are I'll bow to Roger's data. There are at least 2 wells, City of Ann Arbor municipal wells, that have already been closed for a number of years because of dioxane pollution. More are probably on the way. But the real question is, and I'm not sure anybody here can answer it, what's the plan for when dioxane threatens City of Ann Arbor water? When Ann Arbor turns into the next Flint? The other thing is, we've seen some data tonight talking about the dioxane reaching the Huron River. If it does, it flows downstream, and the next town downstream is Ypsilanti. Ypsilanti is a stakeholder. Ann Arbor definitely is a stakeholder. And some of the seeps that we're talking about are in Ann Arbor. It's not a matter of when it gets here or if it gets, it's here right now, even as we speak. There was no data presented tonight on the recent City of Ann Arbor water testing that went on. I think all the residents here got a little note in the mail like I did that said, we missed something, but we caught up. What is the current dioxin? Actually, if you go on the Ann Arbor website, it's hard to find the dioxane number buried on the website. It is buried. There's no question. It's a political issue in Ann Arbor. It's a university issue. If the University of Michigan is a stakeholder in their drinking water and their ability to maintain a campus within the city limits of Ann Arbor is predicated on Ann Arbor water, the university should be screaming bloody murder. But they're not. Mainly, in part, I won't go there.
Can you wrap up your question, please?
So my question is, where is Ann Arbor in this? Where is discussions about vapor intrusion in Ann Arbor, Michigan basements? For those that know what that means, there are homes on the Old West Side with Michigan basements. I've seen them, I've been in them. I'm sure having sat in on a different subject with the DEQ a number of years ago, their vapor intrusion is based upon a non-pregnable concrete basement. Where's vapor intrusion on Michigan?
So in terms of the question, what's the role of the City of Ann Arbor? The City of Ann Arbor was one of the parties that was pushing for so I'm at Chuck Warpehoski, I'm on Ann Arbor City Council. The reason that my role in the panel is low, as was discussed earlier, is because we are in litigation, discussions with Gelman over what that cleanup is. Those discussions are confidential as they go forward. I don't know where they're going to turn out, and we are in a precarious place, and it's frustrating. I wish I could be fully transparent about where those are going, but the nature of that kind of negotiation requires that they be confidential. The judges require that they be confidential. In terms of the question about...
I'm going to interrupt you because I want to say, for the record, that the inclusion of more and more stakeholders puts a gag order on all public information available to the citizens.
Yes. Right.
I believe that's intentional for the wrong reasons. You're an example of it.
The information that we can share is the information related to the negotiations and the settlement discussions. That's an order that's based on the judge. What is available is, for example, the data that was shared by Mr. Edelman about what's coming with test results. What is available is the drinking water numbers that are on, we put our water report right on our water website. So that's...
There is a stream, an on-surface stream that runs 24/7 at the foot of April, I think it's Boulevard, just west of Wagner. It's not Honey Creek. It's not Mill Creek. I don't know what it is.
So
nobody's sampling that. I haven't seen any discussion of that.
So we'll add that to ask Mr. Edelman, Congresswoman Dingell, and then we've got 15 minutes. We're going to let the people
I will let the microphone go, but I am...
We're going to let the people who are online, we're going to let Congresswoman Dingell press, and then like the...
We share your frustration, and there were people that didn't want us to do this town hall. But we are people that we share your concern, so that's why we're here. And I think it's very important to hold the Department of Environmental Quality accountable, transparent, showing where the testing is when new tests come in. I was about to say we did a letter to EPA, and the former EPA director had engaged. We have a new EPA, so I guess that editorial comment said it all. But having said that, I will say that two of the constituencies that are, so as the lawsuit is moving forward, and people are bound, but the transparency is still there. You all need to ask a testing, you need to ask where it is if you're worried about, we sent the letter to EPA about the vapor intrusion, asking questions, etc. The preliminary investigation into Superfund, potential Superfund, and I don't want to give people false hope on Superfund because because we're not funding Superfunds enough, and even if it were to be designated as a Superfund site, it takes, the Department of Environmental Quality will tell you this, it's a very long process. which, like everything else these days, seems to be broken. But having said that, the investigation, the preliminary investigation is going on. So we are being transparent, watching out for people, and people know these issues have to be addressed. This meeting is happening tonight so that there is a group of people that can flag the issue and you can hear it, and those that are party know what people are thinking. So that is why this meeting is happening, because people do care, and we do need to keep this process as transparent as possible while people are seeking solutions, and there is more than one process going on right now so that people continue to make it accountable. And I think CARD will, I mean, this has been going on before any of us were here, and it's spreading,
Right.
but I think more people are paying attention.
Right, and just to reassure you, CARD is getting the data that the company provides through the DEQ. But the problem is, we're not getting all of the data that they supposedly have that is showing up in their maps and their diagrams. And that's something that can be taken, the court can resolve that. But I'm not a party to the case, CARD's not a party to the case, so we can talk about any of that stuff. So talk to me afterward.
Next question, please.
Keep that transparency.
My name is Helen Amanoff. I'm a longtime resident of Ann Arbor. We used to live on the west side of town in the old days, 60s, 70s, 80s, and became fully aware of what was happening with the Gelman Plume and so forth, and the spills. And for full disclosure, I will say that I do know the Gelmans, and I am a friend of theirs, but I'm not here to defend them. But I do feel that some facts should be made known. I know for a fact that when this spill happened, Gelman, followed all the rules of the DEQ. Whatever the DEQ told them to do, they did. And it kept on going and going, and they kept on asking for more and more. And then after a while, Gelman, I think, stopped because he got fed up. I mean, that's what I understood. But I don't know. I'm coming to the question, please. All right, I can tell the question right now. I went to a meeting like this at Slauson last year sometime. All we're doing is talking about study after study after study after study. Now we're waiting for the outcome of the court, the legal suit. Why? What is going to be done once that's settled? What is going to be done to do the cleanup? Where are we going to go? How are we going to get this resolved? We don't hear anything about that. All we hear about is more and more studies. And I would like to know when there is going to be a solution dependent upon the outcome. But what is the solution?
Thank you. Let me just say real quickly, there's some evidence of what Gelman did or didn't know that's in the public sector. We can go to that later. But as far as what to do to clean up, it's a pump and treat system. But for longer than the DEQ might want to acknowledge. The DEQ has 28 more years in an agreement with the company, with Gelman Sciences, to letter of credit to spend like $1 million a year.
As we acknowledged publicly in many forums, we, the DEQ, are transparent with the community to say this problem is going to be around for decades to come. That's the same thing that EPA has said.
Right.
The financial assurance mechanism that Roger mentioned, letter of credit, yes, it's got a 30-year duration, but it resets every 5 years so that we can update it with the best available information. In terms of what's happening, the facts include that Gelman is currently pumping and treating about 500 gallons per minute, which equates to about 720,000 gallons per day.
Is that enough?
The question up here is that enough? And that's an excellent question because it points to how relative what enough is. And it goes back to this issue that over the course of my 30-plus year career, how clean is clean or how clean should clean be? Now, Gelman's current discharge permit through another arm of the DEQ allows them to pump and treat up to 1,300 gallons per minute. So we're talking well over 1 million, close to 2 million gallons per day. They have ratcheted that down. We understand the frustration. You talk about transparency, and I'd say the DEQ is absolutely as transparent as we can be, sometimes to our own detriment, because after some of the decisions of the locally elected judge, and particularly the 2004 decision that created this prohibition zone and allowed the company to avail themselves of some of the provisions of the 1995 amendments to the formerly known Polluter Pay Act, we cannot, because we're honest people, we try and talk in terms of a remedy instead of a cleanup, because the question about how clean should clean be is, in some cases, a subjective answer, and we're focused on making sure that people are not drinking unsafe levels of groundwater. We absolutely agree the city is a stakeholder. We're working closely with them to assure that that the adequate testing gets done to make sure that objective is being obtained. Vapor intrusion, well, I guess we can talk about vapor intrusion later. I think I got to the gist of that.
So I just want to summarize the reason that.
Oh, Lord.
Be real quick, sir. The reason that this legal strategy.
Why don't we just get all the questions? Okay. So what we're gonna do? We've got 5 minutes before the library's gonna start moving us out. So
my name is Donna Lasinski. I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, and the questions I want to raise is number one: what authority does anybody have to say you can't talk about the lawsuit? That's number one. Number two, why haven't the issues of what you can't talk about presented to the public? And number three, whatever happened to transparency when it didn't exist from the get-go?
Right. Still online, get them all out in the air, try to answer them as best as we can before the library kicks us out.
All right, my name is Jeff Ainer. I live here in Ann Arbor quite some time, been following this for a while, since the 80s. So I've been in this room when they've had a presentation on alternate transportation, and there's been a couple dozen people in here, and they have $550 million in the CIP, the capital improvements plan for that, and hardly anybody cares. I've been in this room when there's been 1% for art presentation, and there's been 2 people in this room, and nobody cares about that. So my question is this, and is what some of the other people said too. At the meeting in the county last year, Mr. Elderman said that, I asked him, what will it cost to clean this up? And he said 30 million, which is like 50 million. You dig 30 wells around this thing and pump it out and get it over with. 30 million, 50 million, that's nothing compared to 515,000 in a CIP, 515 million in a CIP. And so my question is, where do the people of the city go to find the written plan for cleaning this up? And why are things like alternate transportation and art more important than clean water? We need a 1% for art. 1% for art. We don't need that. We need 1% for water. We need to be saving for this in the future. I encourage everyone to contact the representatives and ask them to save from our astronomically high water bills 1% for water. So tell us, where can we find the plan for cleanup?
Hi, my name is Brian Merlos. I'm here on behalf of the National Audubon Society, and I think I have an answer to the question. Excuse me, it's for the state. It's the Clean Michigan Initiative. It's a $675 million bond that was passed in 1998 that is mostly obligated or has already been spent, that is set to expire. So my question was for particularly Representative Rabhi, who is on the Appropriations Environmental Subcommittee, asking what is the next step once that bond expires, to either refund it through a borrowing plan or to send another referendum to the people of Michigan to pass another cleanup plan. Thank you much for your time and everyone for their vocal enthusiasm.
Hi there, my name's Jim Schultz. I live in 48103. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate it. 2 things. Number one, I worked at Gelman in the late 70s for about 6 months. And they had a system there where they were sprinkling their pollutant on the grass. And if any of it, the wind blew the wrong way, they would shut down production and have everybody go wash their car because it would eat the paint off the car. My son lives on Delawood. He has 2 small boys. They play in the grass. They play in the basement. They grow vegetables in their yard. I want to know how they can be protected from the dioxane plume. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So to wrap this up, what Representative Rabhi suggested is that we just go along the panel to make closing remarks and answer the questions as they are able. I'm going to ask if Mr. Lund or Mr. Edelman from the DEQ want to go ahead and start that off, and then we'll just move down the panel this way.
Okay. You're looking for answers to these questions?
Answers / closing remarks.
So just to help you out here a little bit, Mitch, I think the first question is how do we, well, maybe it's not the first question in the order, but what's the cost and how are you actually going to physically clean it up? I think that's a very common question here, right? Right. Okay.
Yes. This goes back to what I was talking about before in terms of the subjective, what is a cleanup? If you're talking, when is it safe? I'm hearing some people say, when is it safe? Well, we submit that it's safe right now because people are not drinking groundwater contaminated with unacceptable concentrations. So that becomes an exposure control strategy. And again, this was not the DEQ's pick. I tell people, like it or not, this site represents an excellent case study in the evolution of Michigan's environmental law over the course of the past 30 years. DEQ took the company to court, was successful in getting the court to a consent judgment to order the company to restore the aquifer to unrestricted use, as Roger said, using a cleanup criterion of 3 parts per billion in 1992. In 1995, overnight, that number became 77 parts per billion. A couple years later, it became 85. In 2004, we found additional contamination. The judge, well, I think it goes to the question of what is a cleanup?
You're not cleaning up.
You're not.
I'm telling you, that's where I'm talking about transparency to detriment. I'm being honest with you people. The judge ordered.
Talking over the question.
Define. So, is the question how much is it going to cost to restore the aquifer to unrestricted use?
Yes.
At what level would you call that? 3 parts per billion.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head. I can tell you that in 2004, the state funded a feasibility study. We could revisit that. That was 13 years ago. Those numbers are outdated.
Is it a billion?
Is it $1 billion?
In the tens of millions, likely the tens of millions.
It's untenable. It's a number so big that we wouldn't even bother to try to do that.
So DEQ's mandate from the legislature and from the governor's office is mitigation, not remediation. The community standard is cleanup, right? So that's what we want to see. We need to make sure the legislature and the executive branch are on board with that so they can tell our professionals at the DEQ that that is the plan that we want put forward for this community. Now, the political reality, as Yousef and others have said, is not exactly that right now. We got a long way to go, right? We got to change redistricting so we can get better people in office, so we can have greater control there. We got to win back the governor's office to make sure that we've got executive branch leadership that believes in these issues. Absolutely. In the meantime, we got to do what we can around mitigation because that's the mandate that this office has been set forth with. We're very fortunate. I don't know if Eleanor Binowitz is still here. She's our public health officer with Washtenaw County. She and our water resources commissioner working hand in glove with the city, with the DEQ to make sure that the monitoring that we are doing, the cleanup that we are doing, is to the maximum extent that can be included inside that mitigation regime. And that mitigation regime is not what we want, it's what we got, right? So we're still pushing hard on that. Someone else was up here earlier talking about the realtor, the gentleman who's a realtor was talking about there are impacts right now on people's property values, right? Respectfully to CART, whom I love, I was the commissioner who introduced the policy to create CART back more than a dozen years ago, it feels like. I respect that we want this to be a polluter pay situation. It is much more complex than that, unfortunately. That's why we're in the lawsuit, right? There's a debate over who's responsible for this. In the meantime, we are paying for it every single day. We're paying for it in lost property values. We're paying for it in impacts on our public health. We need to make sure that if we want remediation, if we want that to be our standard, that we are also prepared to come to the table with resources to make that happen. And we can do that. I really, truly believe we can do that. As Jeff said, this is a tens of millions, and Mitch agrees, tens of millions of dollars problem, not billions of dollars. It's a problem we can solve. I can't talk to what's going on in the lawsuit. I can talk to what we can do as a community to be prepared for when that lawsuit comes to settlement or to fruition, to get a standard that is higher than mitigation and get this thing cleaned up to the standard that all of us want in this community.
We as state elected officials are not part of the lawsuit. So I cannot speak to what is going on with that lawsuit. However, what we can say is that having the city, the watershed council, the township, and the county being part of that is really important. It's really important because those are all the areas that we live in, right? And if we want it to be a polluter pay, which I can tell you I personally want it to be a polluter pay, I don't think, even though I'm willing to pay for it as a taxpayer in the county, I want the people responsible to pay for it. I think everybody wants that. Is anybody in disagreement about that? We have to engage the legal process in order for that to happen. In order for that to happen. That's right. That is what has to happen. You cannot wave your hand at them and say, you have to pay. You have to get the lawyers involved. I'm not a lawyer, and it's frustrating as hell. But it has to happen. That is how you're going to get a polluter pay set up. And we now have made the progress that all of those entities are now part of that consent agreement. That is new. That is not something that happened previously. It took way too long. I heard it took 50 years. That's right. You know, it did. It took way too long. Absolutely. There have been more political fallacies that are associated with this than we should ever care to admit or accept. But we are now in a situation where I think we're doing everything we can to move towards a polluter pay. And I think that's really important. So, do I know the answer? Do any of us know the answer to what is included in that lawsuit? The answer is absolutely not. We cannot answer that question for you tonight. But we are now in a place where the stars are as best aligned as they ever have been to ensure that we have a polluter pay cleanup. And that's something that I think everybody wants. So, you want to add anything? Please.
All right, so I love the energy in this room. And the reason I love the energy in this room is because so often you go to these, public meetings about city issues or whatever, and like nobody shows up. But this is amazing to see this turnout, and it's amazing to see the energy. And I think it's important not only for us as elected officials, but for our friends at the DEQ to see how important this is for the community and how fired up we are to solve this problem. We want this done. We wanted it done yesterday. We wanted it done 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ait should never have happened in the first place. But so here's, it does always come. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna close, and I don't know if Debbie or Donna want to say anything else, and I'll let them speak for themselves. But what I want to just quickly say is I want to acknowledge Kathy Knoll from Scioto Township, Bryce Kelly from Scioto Township, Mike Moran from Ann Arbor Township, all the Ann Arbor Township officials, because we've been meeting as officials before the lawsuit happened. And one thing that we all agreed on is we would not be happy until this was cleaned up, like we were talking about earlier. So your local elected officials, your state elected officials are on the same page with you. We want to make sure that this gets cleaned up. And that's what we talked about in those meetings, is to clean it up to basically as the best of a standard as we could. And so that's something that we're all trying to do. And there's local strategies for that. And one of those local strategies is legal. Because we got pretty much screwed last time around by a judge who decided that he was going to side with the company and give the company most of what they wanted. And that was partially because the DEQ was the only one in the room, and the city and the county and others were excluded from that litigation. And now they're making sure that they're not repeating that, or it wasn't their mistake to begin with. The judge didn't let them be part of that, is my understanding. Now they're asserting themselves that they want to be part of that, because they want to be at the table when those decisions are made. They want their lawyers at the table to make sure that the citizens of Ann Arbor, the citizens of Scioto Township, citizens of Washtenaw County are represented at that table, so that they have a stronger bargaining power and so forth. And so that's one of the avenues. The other avenue that we're fighting for in Lansing is pushing the DEQ to overcome this massive barrier that's being put in place by the manufacturers and some of these other stakeholders that have big bucks backing the people that are trying to block any of these rules from changing. And our job is to push them and to say, no, push this down the road, keep on moving, despite those hurdles, despite those challenges, keep on moving forward, because it's the right thing to do for our district. That doesn't mean that those hurdles aren't gone. Those hurdles are still there. Those hurdles may never change until we get a campaign finance reform effort in the state to make sure that our politicians can't get bought and sold by big companies like what they're doing right now with this process. But what we're doing is we're fighting on our angle at the state level to try to push that along, so that when there is a court decision and a cleanup strategy that's put in place, that we're cleaning up to a better standard than the initial standard that that the state has had, unfortunately, for too long. 85 parts per billion is not okay. It is a health hazard, and we need to make sure that we're pushing our state in the right direction on that issue. So there's a lot of fronts that we're moving in, but at least from, maybe I don't want to speak for anybody else, I'm sorry I said everybody's name, but we're all at the table. We're all talking about this, and we all have the same goal in mind, and that is public health. We want to make sure that this gets cleaned up. And we're pushing the DEQ, we're pushing our partners at the state, and they're trying to do their jobs, and we're trying to do our jobs. And that's part of why we're having this forum, is to let everybody know how passionate people are about this issue, how fired up this community is to get this resolved. And I think it's a huge mountain to climb. But I think all of us working together, I think we can make progress on this issue. So I want to thank you all for coming out, for your passion, for your advocacy, and this is not the last time there'll be one of these. Hopefully we'll have many more opportunities for citizen engagement. Did either of you want to?
Well, I don't want to not say anything tonight. I think I'm as pissed off as everybody else is in this room. So I think that Yousef did a good job of summarizing it for all of us. And if you ever stop making your voices heard, you take the foot off the accelerator. Don't ever take it off the accelerator. We've got a court case that's got to hold polluters accountable. We have to keep the federal attention on it, and that's why I think it's great that Ann Arbor Township and Scioto Township, and I might also add that Sierra Club is part of the Superfund site, and the Huron Watershed is part of the court case, which also keeps a very strong third-party advocate for you in each room, which I think is very important to acknowledge as well. And I have to admit that I was pretty frustrated 6 months ago when I said, what do you mean you can't talk about this? What do you mean you can't talk about this? Because your questions aren't going away, and people are afraid. And you are hearing about vapors coming in basements, and you are worried about your drinking water, and you are worried about it getting next to Barton Lake. And that's something we should never stop worrying about. We're here to commit to you that we're going to keep that transparency. We're going to keep asking questions, and we're not going to stop being part of the community, fighting to get this fixed once and for all. There aren't easy answers. If they were, we wouldn't all be in this very warm room tonight, as angry and as passionate as we are. We said we're going to have this meeting, even though, I can't tell you how many people wanted to be part of this meeting and wanted to talk about it, and we were like, we got to let the community talk. We're here, we're not going to stop. You've made your issues known. There are people in the room when that court case is being discussed who are hearing what you're saying and know they are accountable to you. Don't ever stop holding your elected officials accountable. That's our job, and we are going to keep fighting for you. We cannot never stop. And if you think this is a good, strong, vocal group, think of what the people in Flint, who had nobody being their voice. So let's not stop, and in some ways, we're going to be a voice for a lot of people across this country who we have to make sure that we worry about the environment for everybody as we go forth. So we're here for you. We're not going to stop fighting. We promise another town hall meeting, I don't know, soon.
To end the meeting with is what can you do to leave this room and take action. So all of you have signed in, you've left your email. What we're going to do is what we know in our offices at the state level is that your voice matters. So we will send out to you in that email the links to the relevant committees, the committee chairs, and the folks and the representatives that we need you to write to in addition to us at this table to make sure your voice is as loud as the other voices that they're hearing from. And so we will include that in the email follow-up to this so that you know who's on the J-CAR. Spell it out for me, J-CAR.
Joint Committee on Administrative
Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. And we will know those. You will know the committees that this goes in front of, and you will know how you can sign up with your email, and it will ping you when something's happening instead of you having to keep searching. So we'll send that all out to you so you can take and make your voice louder and amplify what we've done here tonight. So thank you so much for coming.
Remember, you're 2/3 water, corporations are not.
They're at 2/3 water.
Thank you guys for keeping it up.
You know, I don't know, sometimes it's hard to get up there. You want to touch my brother?
Very nice.